Before you immerse yourself in tonight's terror, hit that subscribe button if you think you can handle even darker stories lurking in the shadows. I'm not sure where to even start. You're probably going to think I'm crazy, but I have to tell you about the weirdest job I had right after nursing school. It wasn't what I expected at all. You know how hard it is to find work these days, especially in healthcare. So when I got an offer from this small hospital, I took it, even though I'd heard some strange things about the place. It was a night shift position at a poorly funded hospital that didn't seem to get much attention. I wasn't thrilled about working the night shift, but what choice did I have? The moment I walked in for my first shift, I knew something was off. The staff was polite but cold, and there was an eerie silence around the place. It felt like everyone was walking on eggshells, speaking in hushed tones when they thought no one was listening. As the shift went on, I started to feel more and more uneasy. I was still trying to adjust to the routine when I overheard a conversation between two of the nurses in the break room. They were speaking in low voices, but I caught enough to make my stomach drop. One of the nurses, a woman named Tina, was talking to Barbara, the older nurse. "You know the rules," Tina whispered. "We have to follow them, or it's not safe." Barbara nodded, but she looked nervous. I know. It's hard to explain to someone new." I couldn't stand it anymore, so I walked over to them. "What rules?" I asked, trying to act casual. Tina gave me a long look before speaking. "There are rules here. Rules you have to follow if you want to be safe during your shift. They don't like it when you break them." I was confused. "What kind of rules?" Barbara gave a quick glance around the room, then leaned in closer. "There are 5 rules. Break them and, well, bad things happen. You don't want to know." I felt my heart race. I wasn't sure if they were joking or if they were serious, but they seemed so tense, almost afraid to talk about it. "Listen," Tina said, "just follow the rules and you'll be fine. Don't ask questions, just follow them. Rule 1, always place a cup of water at the nurse's station before midnight. If it disappears, you're safe for the night. If it doesn't, leave immediately. Rule 2, if a patient asks for the time after midnight, do not give them the correct time. Lie. Rule 3, never use the staff elevator after 2 a.m. Take the stairs. Rule 4, if you find a stethoscope lying on the floor, pick it up and put it on. Do not listen to anything. Rule 5, do not let the ICU monitors flatline. If they do, cover the patient's face and leave the room." I barely had time to think about those rules before my first shift rolled around. It was a little after 11 p.m. when I noticed the first thing that really threw me off. I was at the nurse's station, which was positioned near the hall, checking on a few things. I remembered what Tina had said about the cup of water, so I grabbed one from the break room, filled it, and set it down by the station. I glanced at the clock on the wall. It was 11:50. I wasn't sure if I was supposed to keep it there all night or just leave it, but I figured I'd follow the rule and see what happened. I turned my back for just a second, maybe to answer a page or check on something in the hallway, but when I looked back at the cup, it wasn't a cup of water anymore. Instead, thick, coagulated blood filled the glass, dark and sticky, like it had been sitting there far longer than I'd been away. My stomach turned, and my breath caught in my throat. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Before I could process it, a scream echoed from down the hall, so loud that I jumped, nearly knocking the cup off the counter. It was a woman's voice, frantic and desperate. "It's too late! She's here!" The voice was hoarse, almost as if it had been screaming for a long time. I froze for a moment, trying to figure out what to do. The atmosphere shifted, like the air was thickening around me. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I couldn't move. I glanced over at the nurse's station, half expecting to see something. But it was just the same. No one was around. The other nurses had disappeared into the hallways, and I was left alone with the blood in the cup. I quickly grabbed the cup, intending to throw it away, but I didn't dare touch it. The blood felt wrong, like it shouldn't be there at all. I set it back down and walked down the hall toward the source of the scream, my heart racing. The scream stopped as abruptly as it had begun, but the silence that followed felt heavier, like something was waiting just around the corner. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, but I had to keep going. I couldn't leave yet. not without knowing what had just happened. I shook my head, trying to clear the fog in my mind as I made my way down the hall. The scream had stopped, but the uneasy feeling lingered, heavy and suffocating. I passed a few rooms, all quiet, the soft hum of machines the only sound in the air. I was about to turn back when I noticed something odd. The ICU room, the one at the end of the hall, wasn't the same as the others. The door was slightly ajar, and I could see the dim glow of the monitors through the crack. I paused, staring at it for a moment. The thought of the strange rules, the blood in the cup, and the scream weighed heavily on me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I had to check the room. I pushed the door open slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. The room was dark, but I could still make out the silhouette of the bed in the corner. There was something wrong about it. I stepped closer, and my breath caught in my throat. The bed was moving, not just shifting or creaking. No, it was moving violently. The body beneath the sheet was rising and falling, as if something inside was struggling to get out. The movements were erratic, too fast to be natural. It was almost like the person inside was having some kind of seizure. I rushed to the monitor beside the bed, hoping to get a read on what was going on. But the screen showed perfectly normal vitals. Heart rate, blood pressure, oxygen levels, all in the green. It didn't make sense. I stepped back for a moment, trying to collect myself. Maybe I was just imagining things. Maybe the stress of the night was getting to me. But the bed kept moving, and the fear in my chest grew. Against my better judgment, I reached out and pulled back the sheet. The bed was empty. I froze, staring at the empty sheets in disbelief. There was no patient, no one beneath the blanket. Then I heard it, a muffled, labored breathing. It was coming from beneath the bed, a soft, panicked sound. I dropped to my knees and looked under the bed, my breath hitching as I saw the truth. There, strapped upside down beneath the bed, was a pale figure. A patient, their eyes wide with terror, their face ghostly white. They were bound tightly, their limbs twisted unnaturally. The person was struggling to breathe, their chest rising and falling erratically. I scrambled to untie the straps, my hands trembling. The patient's eyes were locked on mine, and I could see the raw fear in them. "Please, help me," they whispered, their voice barely audible. I quickly freed them and helped them sit up, but as soon as they were free, the monitor beside the bed let out a shrill beep. The flat line. I looked up at the screen, panic rising in my chest. The patient had a pulse, but the screen was showing a flat line. I grabbed the patient's wrist, checking for a pulse, but my hands were shaking too hard to feel anything. For a moment, everything felt frozen in time. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Then, just as quickly as it had stopped, the monitor reset itself, showing normal vitals. I couldn't believe what I had just witnessed. I helped the patient to their feet, both of us still shaken by what had just happened. I glanced at the monitor one last time before we left the room, and everything seemed normal again. But I knew, deep down, that nothing about this night was normal. I was still reeling from what had just happened in the ICU when I made my way back down the hallway. The patient I had just rescued was sitting up in their bed, looking dazed, but otherwise okay, though I could tell they were still trying to process everything. I checked the time on my phone. It was 12:30 a.m. I was trying to shake off the tension in my muscles when I heard a voice from behind me. "Excuse me, nurse?" I turned around to see a patient sitting up in one of the rooms, their face pale under the dim light. They looked like they had just woken up, their eyes bleary and confused. "Yeah? Is everything okay?" I asked, stepping toward the room. The patient blinked a few times, then looked at me with a distant expression. "Can you tell me the time?" I glanced at my watch, already feeling the weight of the night pressing on me. I didn't want to check the time in front of them, but I had to. I could feel the pressure building. "Sure," I said, glancing at the clock on the wall. "It's 1:15. Following the rule, do not give them the correct time." The moment I said it, something in the air shifted. The patient's head snapped back, jerking violently, and their eyes widened in shock. They let out a ragged scream, their voice trembling as they shouted, "Wrong time!" I froze, staring at them in disbelief. What had just happened? Before I could even react, I heard the unmistakable sound of the clock on the wall. Tick, tick, but this time it sounded wrong. I turned toward the wall, my heart racing. Every single clock in the hallway had stopped at exactly the same time. 1:15. Not a second more, not a second less. My pulse quickened. The silence in the air felt suffocating, but then something strange happened. Shadows, which had been cast by the dim light, began to move. They stretched unnaturally across the walls, writhing like living things. I could hear the ticking, louder now, as if it was coming from everywhere at once, each tick feeling like it was pounding in my skull. The shadows seemed to be crawling toward me, stretching their limbs out, reaching for me. The sound of the ticking grew deafening, and then suddenly, silence. It was as if the world had stopped entirely. I turned back to the patient, who was now shaking violently in their bed. Their eyes were wide with terror, their mouth moving, but no sound came out. The air felt thick, like we were suspended in time itself. I couldn't move. Everything felt wrong. The shadows were still there, creeping along the walls, but they weren't just shadows anymore. They were something else, something far worse. And then, as quickly as it had all started, the clocks began ticking again, but this time the sound was distant, faint. I didn't know what had just happened. I don't know what to do anymore. These rules, they feel like a twisted game, a way to control us, to keep us in line. But I can't shake the feeling that they're more than that, like they're meant to protect us from something worse. The shadows, they're not just shadows. They're alive, waiting for us to slip up. If I follow the rules, I might survive the night, but I'm starting to wonder if that's just another trap. Breaking them feels like it might be my only way out. But what if it only makes things worse? I'm stuck between obeying them and risking everything. Either way, I'm playing a game I don't understand. The night had only gotten stranger. The air felt thick, suffocating, and every corner I turned seemed to hold something just out of reach, something I couldn't understand. I had just finished checking on the patient after the time incident and was walking down the hall when I heard it. A low, guttural growl. It was coming from the stairwell. My heart skipped a beat, and I froze. It sounded like something was lurking down there. I glanced around, my mind racing. I knew the rules. I wasn't supposed to take the staff elevator after 2 a.m. It was one of the most important rules, the one everyone whispered about with a mix of fear and warning. But I was alone, and the thought of climbing those stairs, knowing what might be waiting on the other side, made my blood run cold. I glanced at the time. It was already well past 2 a.m. The growling from the stairs grew louder, like it was getting closer, and I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was down there was hungry. I made a snap decision and rushed toward the staff elevator. I couldn't take the stairs. Not now. I pressed the button, and the elevator doors opened with a soft ding, like they'd been waiting for me. I stepped in, my breath shallow, my pulse racing, and I pressed the button for the ground floor. The doors slid shut, and the elevator jerked into motion. But as the doors closed, I felt a strange sensation, a cold chill creeping up my spine. The growling from the stairs had stopped, but I didn't feel safe. I reached up to press the button again, but before I could, the elevator halted, its lights flickering. I turned and my stomach dropped. There in front of me was a version of myself, a bloodied, disheveled version of me, clawing at the walls of the elevator with desperate, frantic hands. Her eyes were wide with terror, her skin pale, smeared with what looked like dried blood. She screamed, her voice hoarse and broken. "Let me out! Let me out!" She pounded on the walls with everything she had left, but she couldn't escape. My heart slammed against my chest, and I took an instinctive step back. The bloodied version of me kept screaming, her hands leaving long, jagged scratches as she tried to claw her way out. She was trapped, just like me. My breath caught in my throat. I had broken the rule. I had taken the elevator, after 2 a.m. The elevator started moving again, but I couldn't look away from the image of myself, clawing and screaming. The door slammed open, and the image vanished as suddenly as it had appeared. The elevator doors were wide open now, and the hallway before me looked just as empty as it had been a moment ago, but I could still hear her screams echoing in my ears. I stumbled out of the elevator, my mind reeling. My hand was shaking as I reached for the wall to steady myself. I had broken the rule. I didn't know what that meant, but I was starting to suspect that nothing good could come from it. I wasn't just being punished by the hospital's strange rules. I had let something in. I couldn't shake the image of that bloodied version of myself, still clawing at the walls of the elevator in my mind. I tried to push it aside, tried to focus on what I was supposed to be doing, but the shadow of that moment seemed to follow me, lurking just out of sight. I was walking down the hallway when it happened. It was just another routine round, but everything felt off. My head ached, and I couldn't escape the gnawing feeling that something was wrong. I was passing by one of the nurses' stations when I saw it, lying innocently on the floor just outside a patient's room, a stethoscope. I don't know why, but I felt drawn to it. Maybe it was the strange compulsion that had been building inside me, the need to break free of whatever this place was. Or maybe I was just desperate for something normal to ground me. I bent down to pick it up. The moment my fingers made contact with the rubber tubing, the earpieces snapped into my ears with a force so strong that it felt like they might tear through my skull. I let out a gasp, my hands trembling as I tried to pull it off, but it wouldn't budge. Then, the sound hit. It was a deafening screech, like 1,000 nails dragged across metal, piercing through my head like a knife. The noise was so intense I thought my eardrums would burst. I tried to scream, but my voice was drowned out by the screeching sound, and then, in the midst of the chaos, a voice. "You're not alone." It wasn't just a whisper, it was a heavy, oppressive presence, like something was speaking directly into my mind. The voice felt ancient, dark, and cold, like it had been waiting for me to hear it. I yanked at the stethoscope, trying to tear it from my ears, but it was impossible. My vision blurred from the pain, my head pounding violently as the screeching grew louder. The voice kept repeating itself, echoing in my skull, "You're not alone! You're not alone!" Finally, with all the strength I had left, I ripped the stethoscope off, throwing it to the floor. The screeching stopped instantly, but the damage had already been done. Blood streamed from my ears, hot and thick, dripping down my neck in a steady flow. I stumbled back, trying to steady myself, but the world seemed to spin. The pain was excruciating, like something had permanently shifted in my mind. I couldn't hear anything. The world had become a distorted, muffled version of itself. My ears were ringing, but there were no voices, no sounds, just the hollow void of silence. The next night the doors slammed shut, every exit was sealed, every window barred, no one could leave. And that's when the real horror set in. We were trapped. There was no way out. No way to escape whatever it was that haunted this place. But in that moment, something inside me snapped. I couldn't just sit here, waiting to be consumed by whatever dark force had been lurking in these halls. I had to act. I looked around the break room where several nurses had gathered, their faces pale but determined. They'd been through this before. Some had worked here for years. They knew what happened when you followed the rules, and they knew what happened when you didn't. "We're not doing this anymore," I said, my voice hoarse, despite my best attempt to sound confident. "We've been living in fear for too long. We need to break every possible rule, force it to stop." One of the nurses, a woman named Karen who'd been here far longer than any of us, nodded grimly. "We've all been too scared to fight back, but it feeds off our fear. That's how it gets stronger. If we stay calm, if we break its rules, maybe we can finally stop it." We all agreed, and in that moment, it was like we were united in a single purpose: to escape, no matter the cost. The first rule was the water cup. We had always placed it at the nurse's station before midnight, and that was the moment everything seemed to go wrong. But tonight, we wouldn't do it. I didn't place the cup on the counter. We all stood back, waiting. The air thickened, heavier than before, as though the hospital was holding its breath. And then, I heard it, a deep, guttural growl echoing from down the hall. I felt my pulse quicken, but we didn't move. We had to stay calm. "I know breaking the water cup rule might not be enough," I said, looking at the nurses. "We need to break as many rules as we can, all at once. The more we defy, the stronger we'll be. If we try to take them all on simultaneously, maybe we'll stand a chance." I looked around at the group, my heart pounding in my chest. We need to be ready for anything. If we come across a stethoscope on the floor, we won't pick it up. If the ICU monitors flatline, we won't cover the patient's face. We'll break every single rule we can. If a patient asks for the time, we'll give them the wrong time. We won't follow any of them. Together, we're going to break all the rules and take control back from whatever's holding us here. We waited. The tension in the air was palpable. It felt like the hospital itself was watching us, waiting to see what we would do. And then, it happened. A patient, pale and sweating, called for Karen. "What time is it?" she asked, her voice weak and shaky. This was the moment. Karen glanced at the clock, then looked back at the patient. "It's 3 a.m., she said, her voice steady. The moment she spoke, the silence of the hospital thickened. I could feel the weight of the echo's presence, its fury rising. But we didn't stop. At the same moment, I stepped into the staff elevator, ignoring the rule that said we couldn't use it past 2 a.m. The doors slid shut with a soft whoosh, and I could feel the tension in the air grow heavier, like the elevator itself was resisting my presence. But I didn't waver. We had prepared for this. We had to stay calm. The air seemed to shift, and a low growl resonated through the walls. The hospital shook, and the lights flickered for a moment. But we didn't stop. We had to push through. If we could break the rules all at once, maybe, just maybe, we could break the hold the echo had over us. We could feel it growing angrier, but we had no choice. We had to show it that we weren't afraid anymore. We had to fight back. In a final act of rebellion, I couldn't help myself. I laughed, loudly, right in the face of the echo, mocking its attempts to instill fear in me. The hospital trembled beneath me as if the very walls were quaking in response. I could feel it, the echo faltering, its form flickering and destabilizing, as if it were struggling to hold itself together. Then a deafening crash echoed through the halls, sending a wave of terror crashing over us. The hospital doors, windows, and walls began to crack and splinter, shattering like glass, as though the very structure of the building was being torn apart. The sound of the echo's rage filled every corner, a guttural, distorted roar, but we didn't stop. We couldn't. The nurses and staff, now free from its grasp, rushed toward the exit, desperate to escape. As we ran into the night, away from the wreckage and the chaos, the head nurse, Karen, the one who had helped me break the rules, pulled me aside. Her expression was grave, haunted by the truth she was about to reveal. "The echo," she began, her voice trembling. "It's not just some random entity. It's a woman who died here years ago, because of a mistake the staff made. She was a patient lost in the system, and when she died, well, her spirit got trapped in this place, seeking revenge." My heart dropped as I processed the revelation. The echo's monstrous form had always felt familiar, but hearing it now, knowing the truth, it was worse than I could have imagined. The face of the creature we had been fighting, the one who had haunted us through every nightmare, was the face of a woman whose life had been taken by the very people who were supposed to save her. The echo had been searching for justice, and we had been its prey. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe for more creepy tales.